Good morning, everyone. And thank you for inviting me to this very interesting conference. I'm straight coming from New York, and it was amazing to hear references to climate justice movement, and especially the marches or strikes that have been happening around the world. So it's very, very exciting. But as you would all appreciate, nothing happened overnight. In fact, if you ask me, I would say we are 30 years late. This should have happened 30 years ago. The purpose of inviting people like me here, as we can see in the session, is to have an exchange between different sectors, as Nabila said. But I must mention that climate change is not as different a sector, or for that matter, healthcare, or we are talking of biotechnology. They're all manifestations of the same crisis that we are facing, and the same cause, the structural cause, which is free market capitalism. And it's important to identify the elephant in the room. What has brought us to this stage of existential crisis called climate change? And if I borrow a phrase from Naomi Klein in her book, This Changes Everything, she says our economic model is waging war against life on Earth. We all should know, and there were references to that briefly in the previous session, that military is the most carbon-intensive and environmentally destructive sector. Nix Burton from Transnational Institute in the Netherlands has done some pioneering work linking militarization, climate change, and capitalism. And let me state a few facts from his analysis and several other reports from organizations like Oil Change International. Let me start with one very specific example. I'm sure you come from this sector, I don't. You must be aware of Jet B-52 Strato cruiser that consumes 3,334 gallons of fuel per hour, which is equal to what an average car driver uses in 7 years. So that's the kind of inequality that we are talking about. Yet, the carbon emissions from the defense sector have not been properly assessed, and in fact are exempted from as a sector from Paris Agreement. And it all started several years ago. We must also know that large-scale deployment of military happens in oil and natural resource-rich regions. Another data to be aware of, that half of the interstate wars since 1973 have been about oil. Well, the current president of the United States, President Trump, doesn't agree to climate change phenomenon, but Pentagon does. And Pentagon saw climate change as a security threat, and it framed it as a threat multiplier. And it also refers to threat assessment, resourcing, as well as readiness. European Union also followed suit and also linked climate change with security in 2008. And very recently, in May 2018, Australia followed the footsteps of US and Europe in identifying climate change as the current and future national security. Now, what does that mean? That means that we are already getting enough hints of militarized response to climate impacts, which means closing borders and handling refugees. We're all seeing what's happening to refugees in parts of Europe and United States. Now, approach that relies on barbed wires and military will only worsen the crisis. When we look at the climate side, we have been asking for $100 billion a year to combat climate change so that it can be used as a lever to leverage trillions that are required. We heard the data this morning. The global military spending has reached $1.7 trillion, and this is from 2017. And here we are unable to find $100 billion as a global community. So what is stopping that? Again, it's corporate power. Let me also take you back to 1980s when the science was very clear about the causes of climate change and impacts. In fact, the amount of confusion or ambiguity that we have seen, which was created around science in the last few decades, didn't happen automatically. It was all planned. And companies like Exxon, Chevron, and Shell, now it has been clearly found that they were the ones who were pouring billions of dollars to cause that confusion. And that not only delayed action by those companies, it also delayed action around the world. And that's why we are living in a 1 degree warmer world as we speak. And the current targets are going to take us to 3 or 4 degree temperature rise scenarios. And that's why you see the world now galvanizing. And the reason also, apart from not only these companies, but why we did not make progress in 1980s when science was very clear, also it was the time when United States was exporting imperialism to the entire world. And that's the current economic model that we have created, which is only servicing the elite minority at the cost of billions of people. Now, when the problem is common and so intertwined, there are some solutions. So my friend from Center for Armed Violence Control, Dipayan Basu, he gave some very good insights. He worked in this sector and I consulted him before coming here. He says there are parallels that can be drawn between divestment campaigns. And again, in the morning session also, we were hearing success of divestment campaigns and also a focus how we can do it. So the climate change community has been able to get pledges of divestment to the tune of $1.5 trillion away from fossil fuel industry. And similar success can be gained or has been gained in this sector as well, in the weapons governance sector as well. Another aspect to look at is who is driving the agenda. And I'm told that in the weapons governance sector, the agenda is driven by the same countries and companies who are in manufacturing and export of weapons. Whereas in climate change, that balance has shifted. If you look at the Paris Agreement, the reason it looks so different from what it was supposed to, it's because the countries who are getting impacted have taken the lead. You find least developed countries, Africa and Caribbean, who are getting most impacted by climate change, have taken the lead and have redefined how the debate or the Paris Agreement had to be framed. If we had just gone by what developed countries wanted, I can tell you I've been following the negotiations since 2008 very closely. They just wanted it to be mitigation-centric, just emission reduction targets and brutally targeting India and China's of the world. But now when you look at the Paris Agreement, it talks about adaptation, it talks about climate change impacts, it talks about finance and technology, how we are going to deal with the problem. It's far more comprehensive than it would have had the impacted communities, civil society organization and countries not taken a lead. And that's a leaf that we have to draw in the weapon governance sector. Do we want the industry to play a leading role in defining how it's going to be governed? We have also example to draw from how tobacco industry was kept at bay when there was a movement against tobacco and against cancer. Well, I'm not saying that the entire private sector is going that way. There are many examples. Country that I come from, now there is a major thrust on startups, and we have seen many innovations coming from the private sectors. Individuals who looked at social and environmental challenges and created many enterprises, but at the heart, the goal of that enterprise is making a change in the social and environmental sphere, and not just about making profit and putting profit before the planet. That's where we have landed. Another parallel that we can draw is how the whole climate community has now mobilized around 1.5 degree target. So it's not 2 degree now, it's 1.5 degree target. And it's about staying below 1.5 degree. As I said, we are already living in a 1 degree warmer world, and look at the kind of impacts we have, and we can't even deal with those impacts. And that target has brought everybody together. There was reference to Greta. So our house is on fire. That the way it was expressed, that also played a huge role. So yes, in the weapons governance, we are talking of disarmed and safer world, but I think we still need to find that common message and trust. How do we bring those communities together? Let me again borrow a solution that Naomi Klein said in her book, This Changes Everything. She talked about we need to reclaim democracies, rebuild local communities, and rein in corporate power. And the whole book is about how capitalism had played that role in making us or the crisis that we are living in. Let me add, while she does talk about democracies, let me add people power much more strongly into the whole idea of reclaiming democracies. Now, what amazes us and why we are discussing climate change movement is because from 20th to 27th September, we saw 7 million people on the streets. And these are not the people who were mobilized just by civil society organizations, people who felt that we need to see the change. And that's the kind of movement we have to see also in the weapon governance sector, especially when there is so much in common. So I would like to invite disarmament movement to join the fight. Let us unite against free market and crony capitalism. We need human security through solidarity and compassion, and not through arms. Thank you very much.